Hey everyone, welcome to the latest stream of React 2025. In today's stream, we're going to be managing feedback. So we're going to toggle feedback so that it's visible or hidden. We're going to delete feedback with a soft delete feature. And we're going to update the feedback page so that it's showing all of the feedback and we can filter by site. So just a quick overview of all the things we're going to cover today. It's basically all centered around polishing off some of the core functionality of the product with fast feedback so that a user can approve and manage each individual piece of feedback, plus also go in between different sites and be able to view the feedback for each site. If we have enough time at the end, I would like to start putting in this new site page, which is basically just an improvement over the current view where you can leave feedback on a piece of a site. So without further ado, let's start making some changes. So first things first, toggle feedback with a switch. I have the app running locally here. I'm going to go into my dashboard. And if I go to my feedback, I have these visibility switches which are tied to statuses inside of the database. We were going to do either a pending, approved, or removed. So right now this is pending, and I want this to actually update things in the database when we click on it. So let's try to tackle that first. This is in the feedback table. And we have our switch. Default checked is if the status is active. But then we also want to handle an on change or an on some action on the switch for when we click on it, and we want to fire that action. So let's pull up Shocker UI. We'll go to a switch, and let's see. I'm assuming we can just do on change. So we'll say toggle feedback. This is going to take some event on change. And I'm assuming we can do the value. Well, we'll just log out the event first to start. Okay. So we have our on change event. We have the target. Not a lot going on there. Interesting. So I'm assuming this is just an input DOM element that has some kind of checked value. So if it's not on change, then maybe we could just do a controlled component on click. See what this looks like. Because I guess where my head's at is that each one of these would have, they can either be a controlled or an uncontrolled component. If it is a controlled component, then we're using React State to manage the state of that switch, whether it's toggled or it's not toggled, and then we can use that for whether it should be default checked or not, as well as handling on click to change that. Based on the docs, it looks like we might need to do a controlled component. Or we have to wrap it in a form. Because right here we're doing a controlled component. Let's go with the control component. So I'm going to pull in React State, and we will say, one thing that does get tricky though is we'll need this to be per row. So we might want to break this out and do its own row, which we were really going to need to do anyway, because this is all of the feedback for the entire table, and we need to manage this on a more granular level, which is an individual piece of feedback. So let's take this component, we'll make a new file, feedback row, and we'll say it's feedback row. And inside of here, where we were previously iterating over all of the pieces of feedback, instead we really only need this piece. This is for one specific row, and then we get passed in a prop of feedback. So I could probably just destructure these here. Author, text, route, status. That looks good to me. Okay. Now, inside of this component, we're going to have I'm doing it whether I want to call it toggled or active. We'll go with toggled. Or did we call it? We did call it checked down here. This is checked, yeah. So now we're controlling the check state of the switch by this checked state. The default value for that state is whether the status of the feedback was active, and then when we click on this or on change, we want to toggle that feedback. So we would go in here and set checked to be the opposite of what it is. So if this is working as I would expect, well, first I need to go into here and let's take all of this and we're going to do a feedback row, and then we want to spread the feedback on that component. Don't need this import anymore, or this, or any of that. So I think we're on the right track. This re-rendered and I'm still seeing all the rows as I would expect, which is good. So now for a feedback row, what I would expect is that when I toggle the state, it should still work. And now each individual component is managing that state. So just to verify, we can even log this in here. And you'll see for each element, whether it gets changed from true to false or false to true, and then what the ID is for each one of these rows. Nice. So that's looking good. Now what we want to do is not only have our kind of optimistic UI where we're going to update this locally with React State, but we also want to call into our database and update the actual value. So inside of here, we were creating feedback, deleting feedback. We probably also want to have update feedback. So on the collection for feedback, get a document with this ID, and we want to update it. We'll just say new values. So I believe what this looks like, when you already have a ref to this document, you can basically pass in any object that will only update those fields. It won't update the entire document. So that'll allow us to pass in some new values here, and we can reuse this in other places. So we have update feedback. We should be able to now use this, and then the new field that we want to pass in will be the status. And if it's checked, then the status is active. Otherwise, it is yeah, that looks right to me. So now what I would expect is that when we update this, it should persist to the database. Okay, so, oh, I need to pass in the ID for that specific piece of feedback. Let's try that again. Now I would expect that if I go to sites and go to feedback, I might have to invalidate the cache, because now I'm assuming if I refresh the page, I should hopefully get those new values back from the database. But it looks like, well, first I need to have feedback table. I need to have a key on this, which is the feedback.id. I'll get rid of that error. Now let's try to figure out why this isn't updating. So if I go to feedback, for example, we have this Google is pretty neat, the status is pending. So I would expect that if I update this feedback, the status I guess if it's initially not checked, update it to be checked, and then go here. I must have my logic backwards because now I'm seeing it as active. And I think it's because I think I have this backwards, right? Because this is going to do the opposite of what the checked value is. So, for example, checked was false, so it was setting it to pending. Yep, okay. So now I'm seeing that properly persist, but there's still the issue of I have the feedback coming back from SWR that is cached. So I think that when we do this, we're also going to want to mutate that route to refetch. So let's figure out, we were doing a mutate here to manually delete that data. I think we might just want to refetch. I think we might be able just to do something like this. API, feedback, and then we'll need to get the user. So now if I change this, I need to import mutate. So I'm not seeing that yet. And my guess is because now we kind of have two sources of truth, right? We have our local state, and then we have the state in the SWR cache. It almost makes me wonder if we should just eliminate that piece entirely. So what would that look like? You would basically just update it inside of the cache while you fire that in the background. Let's try that. Because I don't know that we would even necessarily need to refetch then. So given some data for the feedback, this was specifically for deleting feedback, take the feedback, find the one with this ID, and filter it out. Instead, what we want to do is take the feedback, we'll say the current feedback is going to be data.feedback find feedback with the where the ID is, right? So now we have that object in the map, and on that feedback we want to update the status to be the opposite. Then when we were putting this back, we would basically do all of the other feedback plus this one. I guess my question is, I don't think this will modify it in place. I think it returns a new copy. So we would then have to filter out this one so that you had the current feedback and then you had the rest, and then you could build that new object with the updated values. To kind of explain what I'm saying, it would be like this, where, right, you had filter out this specific piece of feedback. So now you have the current one and you have all other feedback. You would update that value, modifying the status, and then when returning the new list of feedback, it would basically be it seems a little heavy-handed to me. I wonder if there's a way. Let me just run through this in my head. Right? So when we go to update the feedback, find the current piece of feedback, make a new array with all of the other feedback, update the status on the current, on the updated feedback, and then return a new list of feedback. And in the meantime, so what I'm expecting here is that if I were to do this mutation, then I should see it still update even though we're not using React State. Because a new status would come in as a prop. Interesting. So they're being reorganized based on this because I'm not doing them in the same order of sorting. Which is fine. We can definitely get around that, but it's making me wonder if it's better to just ditch the optimistic UI for this and just call mutation to update and get the new values. And what I mean by that is not do this, update the feedback, await that, and you would just do this. So this should return a promise. So we should be able to wait until that has finished and then just fetch the new values. And that should re-render this component. This could be easier than having to deal with then maintaining that status as well. Let's try that. Just gonna do a hard refresh here, make sure we don't have anything in the cache. Interesting. So I think the reason that wasn't working is because it was still looking at the value in React state, which was not being updated since we're now using the actual value from the database as the source of truth here. So now I'm curious if switching that to the prop, which should be the new value from the API. Okay. I'm good with that. I mean, it's not immediate, but it's still pretty good, and it saves us a little bit of heartache with figuring out how we want to do optimistic UI for that. So I'm gonna consider that. Good. Deleting feedback. This is another piece that I wanted to check out. So right now, if you go in here and you hit delete, in a previous stream we did this delete feedback button, which pops open this and deletes the feedback and it does the mutation, right? I think what we want to do instead of actually deleting the feedback is inside of here, instead of deleting that, what we want to do is update this to say the status is removed. So what this is going to do, it's a soft delete. It's still in the database. It's not actually purging it from all the different places. If we do this, now what we need to do is filter out the feedback that we fetch so that it's only the feedback that has been not removed, right? So for this page, right, when I'm looking at this, let's say I want to say Google is pretty neat. I want to go in, I want to say, let's delete this. That's going to take the optimistic UI and delete it out of the SWR cache. But if I reload the page, I'm still going to see it show up because we're fetching all of the feedback and not necessarily looking at the status. So if I go in here, I see that the status is removed, but it's still showing up inside of this view. So if we go to our database on the server side where we're fetching all of this feedback, right? Get all the feedback where the author ID is this, and then we also want to say where the status is not equal to removed. Now I need to make sure that it's that not equal syntax. So see if I can find that. I'm assuming it's this, but I want to make sure. Okay, it is. So now, can't read property, length undefined. Get the feedback where the author ID is this and this status is not equal to removed. And it's saying it's not getting any feedback back from the API route, which I'm guessing is because if I were to go to API feedback, which I guess I can't do that. I can't access it directly. But I should be able to see it inside of here. I wonder if you can't string wheres together, if you have to do it as like an object. No, you can definitely string them together. So let's reload this page. What? So it's saying that not equals is not a valid. Which is strange to me because I just saw in here that not equal. Oh. Oh my gosh. Are not supported. That is hilarious. Okay, that's fine. Where the status is equal to pending or approved. Is that what we called it? Feedback row. Active, not approved. Sometimes you just gotta reread it, you know? You gotta really pay attention to those docs. Okay. So it's saying that I don't have any feedback. Which is interesting. Is there a string comparison here? I mean, that seems right to me. Let me just do a sanity check. The feedback API route gets the user feedback. Correct. And that is the function that we're looking at, and it's giving us back an empty array. Maybe you can't do a where, two wheres on the same field. array contains. It's not an array though. Use the in operator to combine multiple equality statements. Aha! Where status, whoops, where status, why is it doing that? Is in, and then you can do an array. So you can't do multiple wheres on the same field. That makes sense. Again, those docs are so good. Woo! All right, there we go. So now we don't see that field that we deleted. Just for a sanity check, I could go back into here, find this where the status was removed, soft delete, and say that it's pending. Update this, come back to here, and I see it. Turn this to visible. It's active. Awesome. Okay, so that's looking good. Happy with that. So we have the toggle feedback on the switch. We're only showing the feedback that's approved. We soft deleted the feedback. Change the feedback page from my feedback to all. So I'll give kind of my thoughts on this. I was thinking more about this product, and when I land in here for the first time, I have no sites, right? So I go in here, I make a site. For a lot of people, it might only be one site. They might only have one site, and they're only using it for one product. They just want to get comments on their blog, or they want to add reviews to their product that they're selling. So my thought is that the majority of the time, people are going to want to see the feedback on those sites, not necessarily their personal feedback. I would love to get it to a point where there's just a ton of people using this, right? And you want to go see like the replies that you've made. But I think what might be more realistic is if I click feedback, this is looking at all of the feedback for the sites that I have. So this is kind of a quick overview of everything that's been left. I can just quickly check on this and see what people are saying, get a pulse on everything. So I kind of want to change it to that. And a reason for that too is so that when you click on view feedback, what I think this should do is take you to the feedback page, but specifically filtered for like this site, right? I only want to go see, for example, fast feedback. Let this page load. There's these 3 comments here. When I go click on this view feedback, I don't actually want to go to the public site page. I think it would make more sense to go to this page and only see those 3 pieces of feedback. So I think what might make the most sense here is doing something like, we have pages/feedback, which is all of the feedback. But then I think what we might want to do is do this same thing, but we'll make a new folder, feedback, and then a new file, which is going to be the site ID, and this is going to be like this. And I think what we want to do inside of here is this is going to be the feedback slash, you know, whatever site ID that we have. And we can just leave that for now, but this is going to be the name of the site, feedback. And then inside of here, based on that ID that is in the URL, we can go into here and only catch the feedback for that site. I'm not sure if this should be statically generated or just continue to do client side like we're doing here. I'm kind of leaning towards keeping it client side for the user dashboard. So I think we might want to go that route. So let's take a look at that. We have, we'll call this site feedback. And then inside of here, we want to get the feedback for a given site. What I'm debating now is whether it makes more sense to make a new API route that would have feedback at a specific site, or if the API/feedback route makes sense to, for a given user, get all of the feedback on all of the sites, and then really this is just doing filtering client side. It might make more sense to do that unless there's going to be a place where it made sense to have a specific route for getting the feedback for a specific site. Because we're already doing that when doing static generation, but we don't have to necessarily go to an API route for that. Let's go down the API route and we'll see how we're feeling. Oh, I guess we already have this. Trying to remember, did we just make this? Because I don't think we're using this right now. Because I see DB, but we extracted that out into get all feedback, which gets a specific site. Okay. And that takes a site ID as a query parameter. I think I might have to pass the site ID as another variable here, just like we were doing with the token. Let me double check. Interesting. I think actually, like in the cache, we want the key for that value to be feedback at whatever site ID it is. So I think we might be fine there. And then I believe if we want to access that value from the dynamic route through Next.js, we can use the use router hook, which should allow us to then pull off I think it would be the query. Like this. Okay, so for a user, get the site ID from the dynamic route, and then use that to go to the page, fetch some data, and then render that. That seems good. Let's go look at, for example, Google. There's the Google is pretty neat comment, which is still showing because we haven't updated this to reflect the database change, showing only ones that are active. But we have this site ID here, so we should be able to now go to feedback, pull that site ID as a dynamic parameter, and then only fetch the feedback for that site. So now I think what we want to do is inside here, I'm debating whether I want to make this component generic enough to handle both the use case of kind of all feedback, because I'll show you, I guess I'll show you what I mean. This would have to change. I'll start by making it not generic, and then we'll see if we want to combine it. That might be the easiest. So for example, this would take in like the site ID. I think it might only need the site name. Because what I'm thinking is the breadcrumb, right? We have feedback, but now we're kind of in a nested route. So what we probably want, we have a breadcrumb item, breadcrumb link. We should just be able to add this in here and say the site name, and then I think this would, instead of my feedback, this would just be the name of the site. So now one thing I'm thinking as I'm doing this, right now we're only fetching the feedback model, which feedback table header, site name, because it's only for the loading state. So what I was saying is right now in this API route, getting the feedback for a specific site, we're only getting the feedback. We're not getting any information about the site. So there's really two options here. Either we combine this API route, so not only does it fetch information about the feedback for a site, but also information about that site, so that we had the name. We could do that. Or we could also directly put the site name on that feedback model. So if we wanted to save ourselves from making another query on the feedback, we'd have site ID as well as site name. I could go either way on this. For now, because I'm assuming if I go into database admin, right now there isn't anything set up to get a specific site. We get all sites, but we don't have anything in here yet to get one specific site. We're probably going to need that anyway. We have to have something like this already, don't we? Maybe not. Okay, so go to the collection site, get the one with that site ID, and there should only be one. So my guess is that we don't even need to iterate. We could just return this directly. So let's try that. So that would work for us to also get the site back here and return that. We'll go that route for now. So let's see, inside of here, now in the data that we get back, data.site.name. It makes you wonder how I want to handle the loading state in this case. if it makes more sense to the trickiest things, in my opinion, are when there is no right way to do things. And you can sit here and evaluate trade-offs between one or the other, but at the end of the day, it's more about getting the product shipped so that people are actually using it. So I'm kind of leaning towards something like this, maybe? You either have it have a loading state like that, do a skeleton, or make it say all feedback and then filter down to a specific site. You know, I'm fine with that. I feel like we should also make this breadcrumb link back to the feedback page. And I think we'll probably want to do that by, let's go to like the feedback table. We can just take, or no, sorry, site table. A similar approach here. So use a next link. The href would be back to the feedback page. Pass that href down to the breadcrumb link, which is an A tag. That makes sense to me. Oh. This doesn't even really feel like it should be a link, right? Because we're already on the page. We're not going to click into that. Because now /feedback should be the feedback for all the sites. So it should be like, see, and this is why I'm wondering if this should be a separate component or not, because now we have three states, right? We have loading, we have empty, and we also have when there's actually a site name populated. So in the case when we're showing all feedback, this shouldn't even show up, and this should say all feedback. So I think it might make more sense to just do a separate component, because this would be like site feedback table header. Because now we don't have to worry about that piece specifically. It's either going to be I have a site name or I'm loading. Because then we can take this, go back to here. And then on the feedback table header, it's just going to be This will be all feedback, and then we wouldn't even have this. And then, yeah, I question if we even really need this, because you're already on that route. I don't know why you would click that. So now this link, if I go to the site table, right now that link is taking you to the what's supposed to be the site page. Instead, what I would like to do is take this, and instead of doing the site name, that's what I want this to go to. And this is going to be a new route. Instead of P, we're just going to do /site. Pass that href down. A link, medium, and then the site name. I might not even need this now. And then this should be the feedback for that specific site. So when I click on the name of the site, it's going to take it to the public page where other people can leave feedback, and that you would actually link out to if you don't want to embed that in your own site. One other thing I was thinking about in this site table, I feel like I can drop the word. Well, I don't know if I should drop the word link or not, because it's kind of implied. But then with site link, it makes a little bit more sense. I could also see this just being URL. We'll leave it for now. So then if I go here, and I feel like the empty state, it definitely doesn't make sense here because you're looking at feedback that other people have left, not that you've specifically left. So let's see. What do we want to say here? Sure. I'm sure that can be tweaked further, but it at least gets the point across. Okay. Next thing, let's see how we're doing. Doing decent on time. Let's see. Feedback page goes to all, clicking view feedback filters. We decided to do separate pages. Rename dashboard to sites, and sites at ID takes you to new mockup. I probably won't get to all of that, but what we can do is, I think, I'm gonna rename dashboard to sites. I could do a find all here, but I want to make sure. That looks good. Yeah, I think in my head the word dashboard made sense, but in reality, like, you're looking at your sites. And then specifically for the dashboard, right? think everything else should be fine here as far as naming. The final piece would be renaming the actual file. And then I don't entirely know why I originally chose /p for this, but it makes more sense to me to rename that. You have sites and then site at ID. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. My prettier is just having a tough day. So let's rename this to sites. And then we're going to rename this folder to sites. No, don't look at my lock file. Okay, I think we're good there. The site table. Site at site ID, and I have my page. Oh, I screwed up that name. Okay, so now the page goes to /sites, which makes more sense. Shows my sites. I have a list of sites, and I should be able to go to a site at a specific ID. Okay, that looks good. The next thing would be starting to structure this in a similar form to the other pages that have the dashboard shell. So if I go to, for example, sites, we have a loading state, we have a dashboard, and a header. I don't think that we will need a loading state for this since we're probably always going to have this statically generated. So I think we would just need to use the dashboard shell, and then we'll probably put some kind of header in here as well too. So let's do that. We'll just copy the site table header to get started. Nice. Okay, that is looking as I would expect. We have our dashboard shell. Obviously still some tweaking that needs to be made here, considering this was going and centering it. Really what we want to do is take the contents of this and turn it into an embed. So let's make a new folder. And then a new file, site ID, and If I go into here, we can pretty much do the exact same thing. This is going to be the stripped back version that is offered at an iframe level. So if I get rid of this, really even what we want to do here is no special fancy formatting with a max width or, you know, special margins or any of that stuff. I think what we want to do is probably just get rid of this and make it up to the consumer who iframes this page in for how wide they want that iframe to be, etc. So like for example, if I switched, let's get a site that actually has some comments. Okay, so now if I switched from here to embed, this is my plan for what you would hand off to someone trying to add this to their site who didn't want to do something with React. They could simply embed this page in that doesn't have any of that extra styling and probably not even worry about even having this part where a user would add the comment, because we're going to want people to go out to the fast feedback site to do that authentication flow and leave the comments on the site page. But overall, I'm pretty happy with this. I think that the bulk of this stream accomplished what I was trying to set out for, which is managing your feedback with toggling and deleting, and then getting some of this infrastructure set up for this site page. So before the next stream, I'll probably tidy this up with some styling to get it to look exactly how I want, but that will prepare us for what we talk about next, which is handling that embedded page, which we can use through an iframe. So with that, for everybody joining along live, thank you. For everyone watching at a later time, I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for the next stream.